Michelle Marie McGrath.
Hello and welcome, and today I'm delighted to be talking to Karen Malone Wright of thenotmom.com. An experienced writer and communications strategist, Karen launched thenotmom.com in 2012 as a much-needed resource for and about women without children in a mom-centered world. The site is distinguished by its embrace of women who are not mothers by choice and by chance. The Not Mom offers commentary and information about this growing cohort of women across America and all around the world. In October 2015, Karen will host the Not Mom Summit, a groundbreaking international conference for childless and child-free women. Previously, Karen worked independently at her own business, the Odyssey Creative Communications Consulting, since 2000. In addition to serving clients as diverse as Women's Initiatives for Gender Justice in the Netherlands and Goodwill Industries of Ohio, she's provided high-energy presentations on social media and online marketing at national and statewide events. Karen is, for me, a perfect example of somebody who's created the resource that she was trying to find. And, often that's the key, isn't it? We're told to create the thing that you wish existed in the world. And that's exactly what she's done. And through this, she's helping and guiding so many women around the world who may have otherwise felt unsupported. So, hi, Karen. So great to speak to you today. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Hi, how you doing?
Great. And so just to start us off, Karen, could you share with us a little bit about whether you've not had a child due to a personal choice or whether it's been circumstantial or chance?
Really, the short answer, I guess, is that it's by chance, by happenstance. But the true answer is that, like many of the women who've shared their stories at the Not Mom, it's sort of both categories. I've come to believe that when you delay motherhood, whether it's infertility or you haven't found the right partner or your money isn't stable enough for you to feel secure, that as enough time goes by, ambivalence sort of starts to creep in. Yeah. And, for me, I began to think if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And you begin to think that you'll be okay if it doesn't.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I've found the thing that's been really fascinating is you start to realize over time that it's really not a straightforward situation for any woman. It seems to be a combination of all sorts of things. And so, again, just reinforces that we need to really let these stereotypes go.
I think the truth is that every stereotype starts with a little piece of truth. So that somewhere on this planet, there is a woman, perhaps because she was the oldest of 12 kids, for example, and she knows in her soul she doesn't want to have kids. Yeah. She really doesn't want to have kids. But the stereotype comes into play when you begin to think that every woman without children really doesn't want kids.
Yeah,
you know what right. I'm saying? So it's not, if you boil down almost, no matter what the stereotype is, I think you can find some truth to it somewhere, but that little gram of truth gets magnified far too broadly.
Yeah, and it is dangerous to make those assumptions, and that's, I suppose, how we then go into a lot of judgment or prejudice and stuff with people, because like you say, there's probably a tiny grain of something, but of course that's only ever a small percentage of the whole picture. Mm-hmm. And it's just that thing of everybody's different, every path's different, everybody has a different set of circumstances that influences their decision or the fact they maybe feel that they've not had a choice or they've not been able to make a decision. So it's really fascinating. And so do you feel there was any kind of key influencing sort of factor, or like it was just a combination of all of that, like you were saying?
Well, for me, I never ever can remember thinking my life will not be complete if I don't have a child.
Yeah,
Because I never took it that far. I
right.
knew I was going to have a kid. I was an only child. And I was, I was so envious of my friends with brothers and sisters. So I always knew I was going to have a house full of kids. And it wasn't a question. And when I married the first time, I was 30 and I attacked pregnancy. I tried to get pregnant. I studied up. I had procedures. I took drugs. And even when I knew the marriage was going, heading for divorce, I still kept trying. And I didn't remarry until I was 38. And by then, I knew I wanted a baby, but I also didn't try as hard to get it.
Yeah,
And truth be told, neither did my husband. So that was ambivalence. That was that feeling that, maybe it will and maybe it won't.
that's right.
But
And the world won't end if it doesn't.
yes, but for me, what I found for me, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes when I was about 43 or 44. And at that age, I would have been a high risk pregnancy anyway. But suddenly I became a super high risk pregnancy. And so I just gave up on the idea that, this makes any sense to go after a pregnancy at this age with this condition. And even though I thought I didn't care, the news that the choice was taken from me just, floored me for a while.
Of course. And so, was that then like a grieving process that you experienced once you were starting to gradually accept that, okay, maybe this is not going to be a part of my reality now?
Um, that's an understatement to say yes.
Yeah.
I think my husband would say that I actively grieved for more than a year, maybe two. I just went into a darkness. If I saw a pregnant woman in real life on TV in the movies, I would start to cry. I don't mean like, screaming boo-hoo, but I would just quietly absent myself from the room and just pull myself back together. I would run from pregnant women because I knew I could not smile in their face successfully.
Wow.
And it was grief. There's no other word for it. We can grieve things that we never actually had tangibly in our lives. So it's not quite fair to say, for example, I lost my mother and that grief is different. You never even touched your child. Well, grief is grief.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a personal thing. Like you say, there's no time frame to these things. And, what was it that kind of helped you navigate that process? It sounds like you really gave yourself permission just to feel how you were feeling.
I would love to say that that's true, Michelle, and thank you for giving me that credit, but I can't accept it.
Right.
I do believe that with, any grief, time doesn't necessarily heal it, but it does make it somewhat livable. But for me, truly, what I believe at the time saved me was that I was lucky enough to come across a day-long retreat for women suffering. It didn't say suffering. It says experiencing pregnancy loss. And it was, in a beautiful, far away from the city, just lots of green grass and a pond and, just the most beautiful setting. And it was about 12 women, and some had miscarriages, some had abortions, some like me had never ever had a child. Some were mothers. They had living children, but they had never really gotten over the loss of one that they miscarried or aborted. And we just spent the day together talking really honestly in a safe space. And the day ended with each of us had been asked to bring something that we had hidden in our homes for that child. And surprisingly or not surprisingly, every single woman had something. I had a little tiny stuffed Winnie the Pooh that I bought in 1982 and locked away in the attic in a trunk. And it was always going to be for my baby. And I took it there and we walked through a labyrinth one by one. And in the center of the labyrinth, each woman said the name of that baby out loud, and each woman had indeed already named that baby. And you left the toy in the center of the labyrinth, and then you walked out alone. And there was something about that ritual and something about that tangible farewell that when I came home, I barely was through the door, and my husband said, "You look better." I was better.
Yeah, it's very powerful, isn't it? Labyrinth work, very powerful.
That was my first labyrinth. I loved it. I have been back several times since.
Wow, and just so amazing to have that support and that, with a group of women like that who've all got that intention. It's incredibly healing.
And it's interesting because the woman who held the retreat held it in part for herself.
Yeah.
And she did get, certainly benefit from it. But I have asked her, why doesn't she do it again? And she said it's too hard for her. Right. It would be too hard for her to lead that again and again and again and go to that place in her own heart.
Yeah.
But wow. I'm glad she had it for me.
Of course. And it's amazing how, we sort of become aware of these things, or it often comes into your life like that as a support. And obviously, there's never any coincidence about who's there in a group dynamic for something like that. So that sounds beautiful. Yeah, we could do with more of that kind of thing, really. But there are starting to be more and more people that are focusing on this type of work to help people. So hopefully it will be more accessible for those that need it.
Yes, yes.
And so, Karen, as you were going through that process, like you were saying, you didn't feel, you did give yourself permission. But what I meant was, from what you were saying about how, you cried and then you'd remove yourself, but obviously because some people would just completely block those feelings off and not access that not let themselves cry, completely numb themselves through all sorts of different behaviours. So
I tried that too. It didn't work.
It doesn't work, does it? Yeah, it's a real pain, that. It really doesn't work. But hey, it doesn't stop us from trying these things at times. So over sort of time, what was it that helped you navigate that process? What did you find that did help you? Apart from, obviously, you went to that sort of day retreat, but did you find there were any sort of processes or, or modalities, or did you have counselling, or what was really helpful?
I did have counseling, but truly it was, after that one day, I was on the road to healing. But I started looking for other people to talk to who knew what I was going, who had the same experience. And the internet, this was, early 90s, and the internet was such a big, and I was, I just kept looking and looking for someone like me. And in those days there were chat rooms. And I could always find a chat room of women who were suffering with infertility and they were still trying to have babies. And I could even, I remember the night I found, because I'd get up at night and I'd be all, sad and weepy, and I'd get online trying to find somebody to talk to. And I even found one that was women who were empty nesters. Their kids had gone off to college and now they're up at night alone and, talking to each other. But I couldn't find anybody that was sort of like me.
Yeah.
And I read some books and I did what you do. I can't necessarily say that there was one thing other than that retreat that helped me personally.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say, there can be sort of groups for people experiencing infertility, but still going through that process and still actively trying. But I think largely women that have had, those experiences where it's just not happening, and such as what you were faced with, often can feel very isolated and invisible and very alone. And in the, if it's not been a case of say, for example, when we lose somebody in the natural sense of say it's a parent or a sibling or a friend or something like that, it's a person that's been there, like you say, it's a tangible loss in that way. But then the other loss of not having had that experience can be just as devastating.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree.
But it's how we, we don't navigate that very well in our society at all, in our culture. It's still really evolving, isn't it? And obviously the work that you're doing in creating the conference so that people can come together, that demographic, and be supported and heard, and look at, how they can support themselves and what's out there and how they move forward if children are not going to be a part of their life in the traditional sense. I mean, it's just vital, as we know.
Well, one thing I've learned through the website is, and through my own curiosity, is how different women's experience of life without motherhood can be depending on geography.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm surprised, but I have been greatly surprised. For example, in Ghana, where there is a burgeoning effort to do basically what the Western communities are doing and getting these women together to find each other. And, in many of those tribal cultures, barren women are looked upon as witches.
Yeah.
That, the things, that they experience are, we can't even imagine. I think it might also be true in countries that are religiously traditional, countries that for the first time, like Ireland, that are seeing such high numbers of women choosing not to be mothers. And it just, it's rocking the culture.
It absolutely is. There's a lot of changes. And I've actually just connected with somebody recently in Ireland who's doing a PhD on the topic about that evolving situation. So it will be really interesting to see what she discovers through her research around that. It's fascinating. It really is.
I think I talked to her.
Yeah, and it's just there's some people starting to do very interesting work around it. And so, Karen, you mentioned as part of what you were saying at the beginning that you also experienced, that feeling of ambivalence where you can feel very on the fence. And I've spoken to a lot of women about this recently, of that, not really feeling a strong pull either way.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think are some of the reasons for that sense of ambivalence? Do you think it's just...
I think, well, this is a sweeping generalization, but I think it's time. Time in the sense that years go by, and as it does, if you're lucky, your living situation improves. Your vacations are better. Your furnishing is better. Your clothing is better. You get a little spoiled because your entire paycheck goes to whoever or whatever you determine it goes to. And it's more of a giving, of money, if I decide to loan it to my girlfriend or I buy a dress or whatever, as opposed to I must take care of.
Yeah.
I mean, other than a pet, which women without kids have in higher numbers and we spend more money on them.
Yeah.
But other than that, you're accumulating things and building a life without kids so that finally, unlike maybe when you're 19 or 20, by the time you're in your 30s, you realize that, as people have said for millennia, having a baby is a sacrifice.
Yeah.
But when you're 19 and 20, you don't have a ton to sacrifice.
Exactly.
I mean, I think that's why, God sort of said, okay, I want you to have them young, because if you're older, that sacrifice begins to be a lot bigger than, maybe you're willing to give.
Yeah. And also I've read, and I don't know how this varies from country to country, but I've read that often as well, the higher level of education that a woman receives, the less likely she is to choose to have a child consciously.
Well, sure. I mean, the research I've seen shows that certainly in America, but in many countries around the world, the beginnings of this trend of more women choosing not to have children or delaying it until it's sort of, which was sort of what happened with me, it started in the late 70s when around the world girls were strongly encouraged to go to college.
Yes.
And suddenly that high school boyfriend you thought you were going to marry doesn't meet your new standards, maybe. Or that job is so compelling and it looks like you're going to get a promotion. I can't get pregnant right now. And you just, you have so many things that you can attribute to education because education shows options. That's what it does.
Exactly. And so, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see again if that trend continues. But I mean, I'm guessing that it will. But remains to be seen. We'll see, won't we, over the next few years how this situation evolves.
Yes, and it's, certainly it's not, if you ask the governments of developed countries around the world, Germany, Japan, those numbers are frightening to people who live in forecasting.
Yes.
Who are trying to see, okay, what does that mean for the safety net of our people? It just as we know children don't always take care of their elders, I think the reality is in a lot of cases they sort of do in one way or the other.
Yeah.
And even if they don't, you can't create a formula to even guess how many would or wouldn't if you don't even have that many children as you did before. It causes worries about the economy and who's going to work in those factories and in those businesses, 40, 50 years from now, if the population is so low.
Yeah, and look, we're a rapidly aging population, aren't we, as well? And also we're increasingly mobile, because I was thinking, even if you have got a great relationship with your parents and you would want to be there to help them when they're older, you're not necessarily going to be living close by to them. I think my parents are in the UK. I'm living in Australia. You couldn't get any further away. And so it's just, so there's no guarantee, obviously that's one of the questions that one of the stereotypes, well, who's going to look after you when you're older? And it's like, well, you can't assume that your children are going to be doing that, even if you've got them, so it's just really, it's interesting to see how our society is evolving. And now there's people starting to look at, alternative arrangements within the community of, say, people who don't have children setting up groups with their friends to look after each other and look out for each other. And I was talking to a coach, Sass Petherick, who she's a Kiwi, but she lives in the UK. And, she was sort of joking about that as well, that she's going to hire a very attractive Spanish nurse to look after her, a male nurse. So,
I like it.
Yeah, so I think we're going to see more and more of these alternative setups. It's inevitable.
Yes, yeah. We're going to talk about that at the Not Mom Summit, too.
Yeah, and so tell me, because obviously that's very exciting. That's going to be the first type of conference of its type in the world that's happening in October this year in Cleveland. So tell us about that. And also, I guess, before that, just tell us a little bit how your site, thenotmom.com, came into being.
Well, as I mentioned, when I was going through sort of the sadness and the looking for acceptance, I went online to find other women like me, and I couldn't find them. So the Not Mom is the website I was looking for back then for myself.
Yeah.
It shows you that, you're not the odd girl out. And because it can feel that way in your workplace where everyone's talking about kids or leaving early for their kids or whatever. And it can feel that way when you are in a group of women and you realize, oh, I'm the only one not talking about a child. And the thing is that because I wasn't in any of those places, I knew if the statistics were true that nearly 1 of every 5 American women will never have a child, I needed to find more of them. And I was curious to find who they were and were their stories similar to mine. And what really led to the website, I went to, there's a huge conference, I guess it is an international conference, South by Southwest Interactive.
Right.
In Texas, and I went in 2011, and basically I was encouraged to go do that, to start the website I couldn't find. So I launched it in 2012, and what distinguishes it is that it's not one totally focused to one side or the other. It acknowledges that whether you once dreamed of having a baby or you never ever did, if you are only 1/5 of the women around you, you walk a different life. You walk a
Yes.
different path, rather. And so the website, once it got going, and I started getting comments, and that made me feel good, of course. And then the site won a regional program for entrepreneurial women in 2012, and then I was invited to speak about childless women online at BlogHer toward the end of that summer. And what I realized was, yeah, good things are happening because of the blog, but mostly what I realized was I had finally found the tribe I was looking for.
Yeah.
And I was actually helping other women find their tribe too. So from day one, I knew I wanted to connect these women offline as well as online. And I felt that there was a hunger for that.
Yeah.
I mean, the more Googling and searching that and talking to people that I did, I found that there were women's conferences in various countries around the world where perhaps, if you're lucky, there might be one breakout session on childless and child-free women. Maybe. But to acknowledge that our community of women is worthy of a major conference that deals with health issues and relationships and how we plan our lives and how we figure out what legacy means when it's not a child that you're leaving on the planet after you're gone.
Yes.
There are other ways. That led to the Not Mom Summit.
Brilliant. And so, well, that's going to be amazing. So, obviously, that happens over a couple of days.
Yes, it'll be Friday and Saturday, October 9th and 10th, 2015, here in Cleveland, Ohio.
And what sort of subjects is it going to be covering? Because I know that you've got various speakers and sessions happening.
Well, I'm proud of everything, of course, but I'm most proud of our keynotes that are designed one each day to represent those different ends of the spectrum. Melanie Notkin, who founded Savianti and is the author of Otherhood, she'll be our luncheon speaker on Friday. And on Saturday, we have Megan Daum, who's written a bestseller of essays, Selfish, Shallow, and Self-Absorbed, 16 writers on the decision not to have children. And so underneath that, at the top, we have a number of speakers from across the country, and one from London as well, in the UK. And they'll be talking about finances and how to how to do exactly what you were talking about, how to do life planning so that that you do have your will in place and you do have advanced directives about your health care. And if it's true that we spend more on our pets, we're going to have a session that shows you how to spend wisely, such as it's not enough to buy cute things for your dog. And cat, you may need pet insurance so that if some disease is debilitating, you've got help paying those bills.
Yes.
And how, we've recently had scandals about pet food coming from China where it made the pet sick. So how do you find the best food? So, it sounds on the face of it sort of funny maybe to have a breakout on pets, but I think it'll be one of the...
Well, it's a big part of people's lives. Yeah.
Yes. We also have, I'm personally interested in seeing a breakout session on faith because at the blog, I've heard from so many women who once wanted kids, prayed for kids, never had kids, and it really sort of upended their relationship with God. I've heard from child-free women who chose not to have kids, who just sort of feel unwelcome in their church or synagogue because it's just so family heavy.
Yes.
And what do you do with that? And where do you
Yeah.
go with that? So there'll be a lot of serious talking going on, but we will also party very hard at the end of each night.
It sounds great. And so, well, that's fantastic. And so, Karen, just as we're kind of closing off, I'm just thinking, so what do you feel now, the point that you're at in your life, are the major benefits that you're experiencing through not having had a child?
Uh, Although I'm not rich, my money is my own. I so many points, and you can't say this out loud to your girlfriends all the
Mm,
time, but the thought of college would just floor me. I would probably start saving money the moment I even knew I was pregnant.
yeah.
Um, I the stress, and I'm sure to any mom listening, she's like, oh, it sounds maybe even fanciful, but seriously, the stress that never goes away. Your child can be 30 years old, and the stress that, oh, was he on that subway that crashed? Was he, I mean,
Yes.
I have angst over my goddaughter and her brother and the children, the adult children in my life that I love so dearly, but it's not the same as their moms, and I don't pretend that it is. Um, my life right now has big hunks of time taken to elders, to my mother-in-law and my aunt, who are both in their 80s and in assisted care. And, you know, there's a session at the summit called the Open Face Sandwich that it was named that by a woman I met at a conference who started crying because she has moved her father into her home. She's not married. And she moved him in when he was diagnosed with cancer, and he's been living there now more than a year. And it's hard, to date when your dad's
Yeah, of
imagine that.
course.
And yet, all of her good friends kept telling her, you don't know what hard is because you're not raising a child and taking care of your father. So suddenly it dismissed everything she was doing and everything she was feeling. And
Yeah.
that's sort of where I am. I am, giving up hunks of time gladly to help my mother-in-law and my aunt. But I'm honest enough to admit, I can't even imagine how hard it would be if I had a little kid too.
Yeah, very
Now
demanding.
that said, I don't dismiss their struggle, and I just don't want anybody to dismiss mine because it is a struggle caring for old people, whether you have the little kids on the side as well or not.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. It can be very draining on many levels. Yeah, so no, it is, and it just really highlights that need to support and be more compassionate, to each other, and just the fact that every woman's life is equally valid and important, and just really have more understanding for each other and tolerance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so, Karen, any last words of encouragement you'd like to offer women who are coming to terms with the fact that they're not going to have a child?
Uh, for the women who wanted a child,
Yeah.
um, I guess, it sounds corny, but I would say it gets better. Grief, no matter what it is that you're grieving, it's a sneaky thing. It pops out when you smell something, when you hear a song, when you least expect it. And you also can't predict how hard it hits. Maybe it hits and you just sort of sad for a minute and you move on. And maybe it hits and you need to close the door because you're going to sob. But
Mm.
sooner or later, it does get better. It pops out less often. And the day comes when you realize, gee, I haven't even thought, that sad thought in a while.
Yeah.
Um, I think if people feel that there's no safe person to talk to, professional counseling can help. I think that most of all, the women, whether they, didn't want kids and can't find another woman who didn't want kids, or whether they did want them and they still can't find anyone without children around them, they're not alone. And the internet is what's proving that.
Yes.
I that if I were a sociological scholar, that's what my book would be on the fact that we've had, women without children, from Shakespeare to, the Bible, but they couldn't find each other. And because of the way the culture was, they didn't want to find each other. If a woman without children found another woman, they didn't talk about it. Oh my God. So now we talk about things and we can find each other on the internet. And I am going to meet so many women at this conference who I've met online, but I've never met in real life, that I just can't wait.
Very exciting.
I just can't wait.
And so
I think I got to say this last thing, though, Michelle.
Yeah.
I think the number one thing I would say to those women is that they can't let the idea of personal legacy be defined by the production of another human being.
No, absolutely.
Everybody's here to leave something good behind if we choose to. So at some point, put your energy toward figuring out how you can make a mark and leave a positive difference.
Exactly. And just working out what else is meaningful and purposeful and fulfilling for you, and sharing that in some way if you choose to.
Yes.
And so, speaking of finding people on the internet, where's the best place that we can find you so that everybody can make a note of your website?
You can find me at thenotmom.com, THENOTMOM.com. You can find out more about the Not Mom Summit at NotMomCon, CON, 2015.sched.org.
Brilliant. Well, we look forward to hearing all about how that goes. And I'm sure everybody's going to have a really wonderful time.
I hope so. I wish I could see you there.
Yes, definitely at the next one. So, well, thank you so much for your time and wisdom today, Karen. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for inviting me. I love this.
Thank you.
Unclassified Woman.